At my party, he made a scene, flipped the table and yelled, "You stole my future." Dad hugged him. I stayed silent. At 8:30 a.m., when they realized what I did, it was already too late. I am 32 years old, and up until my birthday last weekend, I honestly thought I had finally made it. My name is Lauren. For the past 7 years, I have bled, sweated, and cried to build my own company from absolute scratch. I work in logistics software. I know, it does not sound sexy or glamorous. I don't design trendy fashion apps or make viral video games. I build complex, boring back-end systems that help freight companies track their trucking fleets across the country. It is a grueling, heavily male-dominated industry that eats you alive if you show even an ounce of weakness. But I survived it. More than survived it, actually. My company recently closed a massive round of funding, and to celebrate both my 32nd birthday and this massive milestone, my husband Derek and I bought our first real house. It wasn't just a house to me. It was a monument to every sleepless night, every skipped vacation, and every panic attack I had suffered in my 20s. We moved into a beautiful, sprawling suburban home in Austin, Texas. It had a massive backyard surrounded by old oak trees, a stone patio, and enough space to host everyone I cared about. For my birthday, Derek went all out. He is 34, an absolute saint of a man, and he spent weeks planning this backyard party. He strung up those warm, soft fairy lights through the branches, hired a fantastic local barbecue catering crew, and invited about 40 of our closest friends, colleagues, and neighbors. The evening was perfect. The air was warm, the music was playing softly in the background, and people were laughing, holding drinks, and having a genuinely good time. I was wearing a new dress, holding a glass of wine, and for the first time in almost a decade, my shoulders were completely relaxed. I felt like I could finally breathe. I felt proud. But there was a slight, lingering knot in the pit of my stomach. Every time the wooden gate at the side of the house clicked open, my eyes darted toward it. I was waiting for my younger brother, Cameron. Cameron is 29, and he is everything I am not. If I am the rigid, overworked realist of the family, he is the free-spirited, chaotic dreamer. He calls himself an indie folk musician. I call him chronically unemployed. He has never held a steady job for more than 6 months in his entire adult life. Instead, he bounces from one delusion of grandeur to the next, fully convinced that he is just one viral hit away from becoming the next massive music star. Derek had asked me multiple times if I was sure I wanted to invite him. I told him yes, because that is what you do. You invite your family. You hope they show up, smile, eat a burger, and act normal for just 3 hours. I had mentally prepared myself for his usual antics, maybe asking to borrow $50 or cornering one of my tech investor friends to pitch his latest demo tape. I thought I was ready for whatever mild embarrassment he was going to bring to my front door. I was so incredibly wrong. Nothing could have prepared me for what he actually did. Cameron showed up an hour and a half late. The party was in full swing by the time he finally ambled through the side gate. I spotted him instantly, and my heart immediately sank. He looked like he had literally rolled out of bed after a 3-day bender. He was wearing ripped, stained jeans, a faded flannel shirt that smelled distinctly of stale beer and cheap cigarettes, and his hair was an unwashed mess. He didn't come over to say happy birthday. He didn't greet me or Derek. He walked straight past a group of my colleagues, ignoring their polite smiles, and headed directly for the cooler. He cracked open a beer, leaned against the brick wall of our new house, and just started glaring. It wasn't his usual lazy, annoying demeanor. There was something dark and intensely hostile in the way he was looking at me. He was practically radiating anger. I tried to brush it off. I told myself to just let him sulk in the corner. I mingled, I laughed at jokes, and I tried to keep my focus on the people who were actually happy to be there. About an hour later, Derek decided it was time for a toast. He tapped his glass, asking everyone for their attention. The chatter died down, and the guests gathered around the patio. Behind me was a small, beautifully decorated display table. On it was a custom cake, a few wrapped gifts, and the centerpiece, a present Derek had custom-made for me. It was a heavy, incredibly delicate glass frame encasing the very first line of code I had ever written for my startup, beautifully etched into a metal plate. It was sentimental, it was expensive, and it meant the absolute world to me. Derek gave a beautiful, brief speech about how proud he was of my resilience. People raised their glasses. I was smiling, feeling a lump of happy tears forming in my throat. I stepped forward to say thank you. I opened my mouth to speak, but before a single word could come out, the crowd suddenly parted. Cameron marched right into the center of the patio. He wasn't walking, he was stomping, his face red and twisted in absolute fury. He marched straight past me, entirely ignoring my existence, and walked right up to the display table behind me. Everything happened in slow motion. He grabbed the edge of the wooden table with both hands. He didn't just push it. He heaved it upward with every ounce of strength he had. He flipped the entire table completely over. The sound was deafening. The custom cake splattered across the stone patio. Bottles of champagne shattered into 100 pieces. And Derek's gift, the framed etching of my life's work, smashed against the hard stone, the heavy glass violently cracking and splintering outward. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Someone screamed. The music seemed to abruptly cut out, leaving a ringing, horrifying silence in the backyard. Cameron stood breathing heavily over the wreckage of my birthday. Then, he slowly turned to face me. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my chest, his eyes completely wild, and screamed at the top of his lungs. "You stole my future. This is the price of your ego. You think you are better than everyone just because you sit in a fancy office, but you're nothing." His voice echoed off the walls of the surrounding houses. I stood frozen. I looked at the shattered glass on the ground, the ruined cake, the terrified faces of my colleagues and friends. I looked at my brother, fully expecting the earth to open up and swallow him whole for what he had just done. But what happened next was somehow even worse than the destruction itself. For 3 terrifying seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the fizzing of spilled champagne soaking into the stone patio. I waited for someone, anyone, to grab him. I waited for him to realize the absolute insanity of his actions. Then, my father, Douglas, rushed forward from the crowd. He is 62 years old, a retired accountant, and a man who has spent his entire life avoiding conflict at all costs. But he didn't grab Cameron's arm. He didn't yell at him to get out of my house. He didn't apologize to my terrified guests. My father wrapped his arms around my 29-year-old brother, pulling him into a tight, protective hug. He patted Cameron's back gently, soothing him as if Cameron were a toddler who had just scraped his knee on the playground. Okay, calm down," my father murmured, loud enough for the people near the front to hear. "He just needs to let it out. The music industry is stressing him out. It is a lot of pressure." I felt the blood completely drain from my face. I looked over at my mother, Cynthia. She was standing a few feet away, her hands clasped over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But she wasn't looking at the destroyed gifts or the terrified guests. She was looking at Cameron with pure, unadulterated pity. She then shot a glare in my direction, a sharp, unmistakable look of silent accusation, as if my very existence, my success, my house, was a cruel, oppressive force that had driven her precious boy to madness. Derek stepped forward, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were completely white. He looked ready to physically throw my brother over the fence. "Get him out of here right now," Derek said to my father, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He is just upset, Derek. Give him a minute," my mother snapped back, rushing over to stroke Cameron's hair. I looked at the 3 of them. My family, standing in a tight, impenetrable little circle of dysfunction, right in the middle of my ruined patio. A terrifying, icy calm washed over me. I realized in that exact second that screaming at them would achieve nothing. Crying would only make them think I was overreacting. To them, Cameron was the eternal victim, and I was the villain for daring to have a life he couldn't afford. I put my hand on Derek's chest, gently pushing him back. I didn't say a single word to my parents or my brother. I turned completely away from them. I looked at my stunned colleagues and friends, forced the most polite, professional smile I could muster, and clapped my hands once. "I am so sorry about the mess, everyone," I said, my voice shockingly steady. "Please, grab another drink. The caterers are bringing out the brisket in 5 minutes." I looked at the catering staff, who were frozen by the grill. "Could we get a broom over here, please? Let's just sweep this up." I completely ignored my family as my father slowly guided a sobbing Cameron out of the side gate, my mother trailing behind them like a grieving widow. I spent the next 2 hours smiling until my jaw ached, pretending the shattered glass on the patio was just a minor inconvenience. I played the perfect host. But beneath that polite smile, a massive, heavy iron door was slamming shut in my mind. My brother had declared war, and my parents had proudly handed him the ammunition. They thought I would just sweep this under the rug like I always did. They had no idea what I was about to do. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the last guest had finally gone home. The catering crew had packed up and left. Derek was upstairs, completely exhausted, having spent the last hour quietly helping me scrub sticky cake icing off the patio stones. The house was dead silent. I sat alone in my dark, pristine new kitchen, staring blankly at the marble countertops. I wasn't crying. I was just thinking. I was tracing the long, miserable timeline that had led exactly to this night. People on the internet talk a lot about eldest daughter syndrome. It sounds like a quirky buzzword, but unless you have lived it, you don't understand the crushing, suffocating weight of it. From the moment I was old enough to understand the concept of responsibility, my parents handed me a silent, invisible contract. The terms were simple. I was expected to be flawless, independent, and completely self-sufficient so they wouldn't have to worry about me. And Cameron? Cameron was the golden child. The fragile, sensitive artist who needed constant protection, endless funding, and a world completely free of consequences. I remembered being 16 years old. I was working awful, grueling weekend shifts at a local retail store, folding sweaters for minimum wage. For an entire year, I saved every single penny. I didn't go to movies with my friends, I didn't buy new clothes. I scraped together $2,000 in a shoebox under my bed to buy a beat-up, used Honda Civic from a neighbor. I was so incredibly proud. I felt like an adult. 2 weeks before I was going to buy the car, my father sat me down at the kitchen table. He looked nervous but determined. He told me that 13-year-old Cameron had a profound, once-in-a-lifetime gift for music. He told me about an elite, out-of-state summer music camp that could change Cameron's life. But the tuition was $2,000 and my parents didn't have the cash. "We need to borrow your car fund, Lauren," my father had said. He didn't ask. He stated it as a family necessity. "It is just a loan. We will pay you back by Christmas. You understand, right? Family has to sacrifice for each other." I gave them the shoebox. I watched my younger brother go off to a fancy music camp where he learned to play acoustic guitar around a campfire, while I spent the rest of my high school years taking a 90-minute public bus ride to work. Christmas came and went. The money was never mentioned again. When I finally gathered the courage to ask my mother about the loan a year later, she looked at me like I had just slapped her. She called me greedy. She said she couldn't believe I was keeping a ledger against my own flesh and blood. That was the moment I learned the golden rule of my family. My money was our money, but Cameron's dreams were sacred. That dynamic never changed. It only grew more toxic as we got older. In my early 20s, after graduating college with a mountain of student debt, I started my logistics software company. I did not have a trust fund. I did not have angel investors waiting in the wings. I had a cheap laptop, a cramped, leaky apartment, and a terrifying amount of determination. For 3 solid years, I worked 80-hour weeks. I ate instant ramen noodles so often that the smell of chicken bouillon still makes me nauseous today. I slept on the hard, industrial carpet of a shared office space because it was too late to drive home. I missed my second wedding anniversary with Derek because a server crashed in the middle of the night, and if I didn't fix it, my only paying client was going to drop me, and we would go bankrupt. I sacrificed my youth, my health, and my sanity to build something real. And what was Cameron doing during those exact same years? He was chasing a vibe. He moved into a trendy, overpriced loft downtown with 3 other artists. He bought vintage hats, expensive leather boots, and spent his days sitting in independent coffee shops writing lyrics in a leather-bound notebook. He refused to get a regular job, claiming that corporate America would crush his creative spirit. And of course, he was constantly broke. Every few months, my phone would ring. It was always a crisis. He was going to be evicted. His electricity was going to be shut off. His car broke down. And every single time, my parents would call me in a panic, begging me to help him out. "Just a few $100s, Lauren," my mother would plead. "He is your brother. He is out there trying to make art in a cold world." I remember one specific incident perfectly. 3 years ago, he called me crying, saying he couldn't make rent and was going to be thrown out on the street. I panicked. I transferred him $800, money I desperately needed for a server upgrade. I felt terrible for him. 2 days later, I was scrolling through Instagram while eating a sad desk salad at midnight. I saw Cameron's story. He wasn't sitting in a dark, cold apartment. He was in the VIP section at the Coachella Music Festival in California, wearing designer sunglasses, holding a $12 beer, laughing with his friends. He had used my emergency rent money to fund a desert vacation. When I confronted him about it, he didn't even apologize. He told me I was being entirely too rigid and that networking at festivals was a crucial part of the music industry. My parents defended him, saying I was just jealous of his freedom. I should have cut him off completely right then and there. But I didn't. Guilt is a powerful, manipulative drug, especially when it is administered by your own parents. Sitting in the dark kitchen after the ruined party, I started doing the math in my head. I opened my banking app on my phone and started scrolling back through the years. $1,000 here for studio time. $600 there for marketing materials. $300 for emergency groceries. Over the last 3 years alone, I calculated that I had funneled roughly $15,000 directly into Cameron's black hole of a life. $15,000 of money I had earned through panic attacks and sleepless nights. But the real reason he destroyed my party tonight wasn't just general resentment. It was a calculated punishment for something that happened exactly 1 month ago. For weeks before my birthday, Cameron called me. He wasn't asking for rent or groceries this time. He was demanding $5,000. He had found a rare, vintage acoustic guitar. He swore to me, with absolute conviction, that owning this specific guitar was the missing piece to his success. He claimed it would give his music the authentic, soulful tone that record executives were looking for. For the first time in my entire life, I looked at my bank account, looked at the endless void of his demands, and I finally said no. I told him I was saving to buy a house, that I was done funding his hobbies, and that he needed to get a job at a coffee shop like everyone else and buy his own guitar. He lost his mind. He called me a corporate sellout. He told me I was dead to him. He hung up on me. For the next 4 weeks, my parents subjected me to a relentless campaign of psychological torture. My father called me twice a week, his voice dripping with severe disappointment. He told me that wealth changes people and that he raised me to be generous, not a hoarding dragon sitting on a pile of gold. My mother would text me long, emotionally manipulative paragraphs about how Cameron was deeply depressed, how he was losing his spark, and how I had the power to save him but chose greed instead. They gaslit me into feeling like an absolute monster for simply keeping the money I worked for. They expected me to break. They expected that by the time my birthday party rolled around, I would be so desperate for their approval and peace that I would hand over the $5,000 check just to make the tension go away. When I didn't, when I dared to stand in my new backyard and celebrate my own success without paying the family tax, Cameron decided to burn it down. He flipped that table to show me that if I wouldn't fund his life, he wouldn't let me enjoy mine. I locked my phone and set it face down on the marble counter. The sadness and the lingering guilt completely evaporated. It was replaced by an absolute, freezing, clinical clarity. I was done being the family ATM. I was done being the punching bag. Cameron wanted to show me the price of my ego? Fine. I was going to show him the exact price of his entitlement. And I was going to do it right now. Before we get into the crazy aftermath of that night and the ultimate revenge, if you are enjoying this story, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, drop a comment below letting me know what city you are watching from. It really helps the channel grow, and I love seeing where you guys are from. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the story. It was now approaching 2 o'clock in the morning. The house was finally completely still. I was still sitting at the kitchen island, staring into the dark backyard where the remnants of my ruined birthday party lay scattered across the patio stones. Derek came down the stairs, wearing his sweatpants, rubbing his exhausted eyes. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over to the kettle, boiled some water, and silently placed a warm mug of chamomile tea right next to my hands. He kissed the top of my head and took a seat on the stool beside me. He knew me well enough to know that when I get this quiet, my brain is usually executing a massive, complex operation. I reached out, pulled my silver laptop toward me, and flipped the screen open. The harsh blue light illuminated the dark kitchen. I didn't hesitate. I opened my web browser and logged directly into my primary banking portal. For the past 2 years, I had maintained a specific, separate checking account linked to my main profile. I had naively called it the Studio Production Fund. The entire purpose of this account was to help Cameron get his music career off the ground in a structured, responsible way. I had agreed to slowly deposit money into it every month so he could pay for high-quality studio recording time, professional mixing, and decent marketing. Because I was the one funding it, and because I fundamentally did not trust his financial literacy, I remained the primary account holder. I simply issued a secondary debit card with his name on it so he could make the necessary industry purchases. Over those 2 years, I had diligently transferred a total of $12,000 into that specific account. Every time I hit a corporate bonus, or every time Derek and I skipped a nice dinner out, a portion of that money went into Cameron's dream fund. I had checked the balance just a few days prior, hoping he was finally going to book the local studio he kept talking about. The balance had been sitting untouched at exactly $12,000. He hadn't recorded a single song. He was hoarding my money, waiting for the perfect moment to spend it, or perhaps just using the balance to make himself feel wealthy and important while he slept until noon every day. I stared at the number on the screen. $12,000. That was money I had earned by sacrificing my own peace of mind. That was money that could go toward our new mortgage or toward a desperately needed vacation for Derek and me, or literally anything other than feeding the ego of a 29-year-old man who had just violently destroyed my property and screamed in my face in front of my closest friends. I clicked on the transfer menu. My fingers were completely steady. I didn't feel a rush of vindictive joy, and I didn't feel a shred of the guilt that my parents had spent 32 years programming into me. I felt nothing but a cold, heavy sense of absolute necessity. It felt like taking a scalpel and carefully severing a necrotic limb to save the rest of the body. I typed in the full amount. $12,000. I selected the destination, my own private, locked high-yield savings account. I clicked Submit. The screen loaded for a fraction of a second, and then a green checkmark appeared. The studio fund balance immediately dropped to 0. I locked the account and permanently deactivated the debit card that was currently sitting in Cameron's wallet. The financial umbilical cord that had been draining my life for years was finally completely cut. I took a slow sip of my tea. Derek looked over at the screen, saw the 0 balance, and gave me a single, firm nod of approval. But in my mind, the money was only half of the equation. Taking back my money was just reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I needed to make sure he understood that there were severe professional consequences for biting the only hand that had ever fed him. I opened a new tab and navigated to my corporate email account. The money was gone, but there was a much larger, much more valuable asset that I had freely handed over to my brother, my professional reputation. A few months before the party, through sheer coincidence, my logistics software company had sponsored a massive charity gala in downtown Austin. The event was packed with investors, tech founders, and local cultural influencers. At my table, I ended up sitting next to the managing director of a highly respected, independent record label based right here in Texas. They were known for discovering and launching incredibly successful indie folk and alternative artists. We hit it off, talking for hours about the struggles of building a business from the ground up. Because I am inherently programmed to fix things for my family, I used that incredibly rare, highly valuable corporate connection to pitch my brother. I told the director that Cameron was a diamond in the rough, a brilliant but struggling artist who just needed someone to actually listen to his demo. I vouched for him. I put my own name, my own company's credibility, and my own personal judgment on the line to convince this director to give Cameron a meeting. And it worked. Just 2 weeks ago, the label had officially reached out to Cameron. They had listened to his acoustic tracks, liked his raw sound, and offered him a preliminary development contract. It was the break of a lifetime. It was the exact thing he had been whining about needing for his entire adult life. He was supposed to go into their offices on Tuesday to sign the paperwork and begin a trial production run. He had only gotten that opportunity because they trusted my character. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. By destroying my home and humiliating me in front of my peers, Cameron had proven exactly who he was. He was volatile, he was deeply entitled, and he was completely incapable of handling pressure or hearing the word no. If he signed that contract and pulled a stunt like this in a professional recording studio, it wouldn't just ruin him. It would reflect directly back on me. The label director would look at me and wonder why a tech CEO would ever vouch for such an unhinged liability. I had spent 7 years building an airtight professional reputation. I was not going to let a grown man throwing a temper tantrum jeopardize my standing in the Austin business community. I started typing. I kept the language incredibly polite, dry, and surgically precise. I addressed the email directly to the label's managing director. I thanked him profusely for taking the time to review my brother's work and for extending the preliminary offer. Then I dropped the hammer. I wrote that due to recent, highly concerning personal developments, I could no longer in good conscience act as a character reference, a guarantor, or a financial sponsor for Cameron. I stated clearly that I was formally withdrawing my endorsement of his professional capabilities, and I strongly advised the label to deeply reconsider moving forward with the development contract, as he was currently proving to be a significant liability. I didn't mention the shattered glass. I didn't mention the cake. Corporate leaders do not care about family drama. They care about risk assessment. And I had just professionally flagged my brother as a massive, unpredictable risk. I read the email twice to ensure there was no emotion in it, just pure business. At 2:15 in the morning, I clicked send. The email vanished into the ether, hurtling toward the director's inbox, ready to be opened first thing Monday morning. I closed my laptop. The exhaustion finally hit me like a physical blow. I walked upstairs with Derek, crawled into bed, and for the first time in weeks, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up the next morning a little past 8 o'clock. The Sunday morning sunlight was streaming through the bedroom blinds. Derek was already downstairs, and I could smell fresh coffee brewing. For a blissful, groggy 30 seconds, I forgot everything that had happened. Then, the memory of the crashing table and the screaming hit me, but it was quickly followed by the memory of my late-night laptop session. A strange, calm satisfaction settled over me. Before I went asleep, I had put my phone on Do Not Disturb mode. I reached over to my nightstand, picked up the phone, and tapped the screen to wake it up. The clock read exactly 8:30 in the morning. Below the clock, my lock screen was an absolute war zone. There were 27 missed text messages, 4 missed calls, and 2 frantic voicemails. Every single one of them was from Cameron. I sat up in bed, leaned against the headboard, and unlocked the phone. I didn't feel anxious. I felt like an auditor reviewing a very predictable spreadsheet. I started scrolling through the barrage of messages, watching the exact timeline of his morning unfold in real-time text format. Based on the timestamps, his morning had started around 7:45. He had obviously woken up with a hangover and decided to buy something online. The first text was confused and slightly irritated. He asked why the debit card for the studio account was suddenly declining on a website for a $2,000 vintage amplifier he was trying to purchase. 10 minutes later, the tone drastically shifted. He had clearly logged into his banking app and seen the devastating zero balance. He sent a massive wall of text, furiously demanding to know what kind of sick joke I was playing. He called me a controlling freak, a corporate tyrant, and demanded that I transfer the $12,000 back into the account immediately, claiming that money was legally his because I had promised it to him for his album. He threatened to call the police and report me for financial theft, completely ignoring the fact that my name was the primary one on the account. Then, at 8:20, the final, apocalyptic wave of messages hit. That must have been when he checked his email. The managing director of the record label, who was apparently an early riser and worked on weekends, had already seen my late-night email. He had immediately forwarded a brief, cold message to Cameron, stating that due to new information regarding his reliability, the label was pulling the development contract and canceling their Tuesday meeting permanently. Cameron completely lost his mind. The text devolved into pure, unadulterated vitriol. He called me every horrible name in the book. He accused me of being a jealous, bitter woman who couldn't stand the thought of anyone else in the family achieving greatness. He typed out that I had intentionally waited for his birthday party to ruin his entire life, completely rewriting history to cast himself as the innocent victim of a malicious, wealthy villain. Not once, in 27 agonizingly long text messages, did he apologize for destroying my backyard. Not once did he acknowledge that he had screamed in my face, ruined a sentimental gift from my husband, and humiliated me in front of my peers. His entire reality was entirely centered around himself, his money, and his lost opportunity. I read the final message, which was just a demand that I call the label immediately to beg for his contract back. I didn't reply. I didn't type out a defense. I didn't block his number either, because I wanted a written record of his instability just in case things escalated. I simply swiped the notification away, locked the screen, and placed the phone face down on the nightstand. I threw off the blankets, walked downstairs, poured myself a hot cup of coffee, and asked Derek what he wanted to do with our beautiful, quiet Sunday. The weekend passed in a state of tense, eerie quiet. I didn't hear from my parents, which meant they were either completely unaware of the financial bomb I had dropped on their golden boy, or they were too busy soothing his wounded ego to bother harassing me. By Monday morning, I was ready to leave the family drama behind and get back to the one place where things made logical sense, my company. My logistics startup is located in a sleek, modern, glass and steel high-rise in downtown Austin. It is a highly professional environment. We handle multi-million-dollar contracts for freight lines, so the atmosphere is naturally fast-paced, serious, and focused. I walked into my corner office, grabbed my morning espresso, and began sorting through the week's deployment schedules. I was in my element. I was safe. At 10:15, the phone on my desk buzzed. It was the receptionist down in the main lobby. Her voice was uncharacteristically tight and nervous. She told me there was a man at the front desk demanding to see me immediately. She said he didn't have an appointment, he looked highly agitated, and he was raising his voice at the security guard. I didn't even need to ask for a name. My stomach plummeted. I told her I would be right down. I took a deep breath, smoothed out my blazer, and walked out to the elevator. When the doors opened to the ground floor lobby, the sight was profoundly humiliating. Cameron was pacing aggressively across the polished marble floor. He was wearing the exact same clothes he had worn to my party 2 nights ago. His hair was wild, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was violently pointing his finger at the older security guard who was trying to keep a calm distance. Several of my employees, as well as executives from other tech firms in the building, had stopped near the coffee kiosk and were openly staring at the spectacle. As soon as Cameron saw me step out of the elevator, he charged toward me. "You think you can just hide in your little glass tower?" he screamed, his voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. "You ruined my life. You took my money, you stole my label deal, and you think you can just walk away." I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still, maintaining a physical distance of about 10 feet. I refused to match his energy. In a corporate environment, the person who loses their temper loses their power. "Cameron, you need to leave this building right now," I said. I kept my voice incredibly low, even, and completely devoid of emotion. He laughed, a harsh, manic sound. I am not going anywhere until you fix this. You owe me that money. You call that label right now and tell them you made a mistake, or I swear to God I will stand here and tell everyone exactly what kind of psychopathic sister you really are. He was playing the victim, trying to publicly shame me into submission. He honestly believed that my fear of public embarrassment would force me to pull out my checkbook right there in the lobby. He had severely miscalculated. I looked directly at the security guard, gave a sharp, definitive nod, and pointed at the glass exit doors. The guard didn't hesitate. He unclipped his radio, signaled for backup, and stepped directly into Cameron's path, placing a firm hand on my brother's chest. Cameron tried to shove the guard's arm away, screaming that he had a right to be there, but two more guards quickly emerged from the stairwell. Within seconds, they had practically lifted Cameron off his feet and were physically marching him backward through the heavy glass revolving doors. He was shouting curses at me the entire way out, looking absolutely pathetic as office workers watched him get thrown onto the downtown sidewalk. I turned around, gave a brief, apologetic smile to my stunned colleagues, and walked back to the elevator as if absolutely nothing had happened. But the moment the elevator doors closed, my hands started shaking. I leaned against the metal wall, taking deep, ragged breaths. 10 minutes after I got back to my desk, my cell phone rang. It was my father, Douglas. I answered it, knowing exactly what was coming. "Lauren, what is wrong with you?" my father barked, completely skipping any greeting. His voice was trembling with rage. "Cameron just called your mother sobbing. He said you had him physically assaulted and thrown out onto the street like a criminal. You took his savings? You ruined his music deal? You are killing your own brother over a spilled cake." He broke into my workplace and threatened me. "Dad," I replied, my voice turning to ice. "And it wasn't his savings. It was my money. I just took it back." "Family doesn't do this," my father yelled. "You need to fix this right now. You have gone completely insane with power." I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain my side. I simply hung up the phone. I realized then that my parents were a lost cause. But Cameron wasn't done yet. Having failed to intimidate me in person, he decided to take his campaign to the one place where logic doesn't matter, the internet. By Wednesday morning, I thought the worst of the fallout was over. I assumed Cameron was back in his apartment, nursing his bruised ego and figuring out how to pay his own rent for once. I was sitting in my office, preparing for a critical quarterly review meeting with my board of directors, when Destiny knocked on my door. Destiny is a 24-year-old junior marketing analyst on my team. She is brilliant, highly observant, and incredibly deeply ingrained in social media trends. She looked extremely uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot, clutching her smartphone tightly against her chest. "Lauren, I am so sorry to bother you before the board meeting," she said, her voice hesitant. "But I think there is something you really need to see. It is blowing up online, and it is starting to bleed into the company's social channels." She walked over to my desk and placed her phone in front of me. The screen was playing a TikTok video. It was Cameron. He was sitting in the front seat of his car, the camera angled close to his face to highlight his dark, exhausted eyes. He wasn't screaming in this video. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He spoke in a soft, broken, trembling voice, staring directly into the lens like a deeply wounded puppy. I listened in absolute horror as he spun a masterclass of manipulation. He didn't use my name, but he specifically named my logistics company. He told his audience that he was a struggling, working-class indie artist who had just secured the record deal of his dreams after years of grinding. Then, he claimed that his rich, elitist tech CEO sister became so insanely jealous of his artistic talent that she maliciously used her corporate wealth and power to sabotage his contract behind his back. He told the camera that I had frozen his bank accounts out of pure spite, leaving him penniless and unable to buy food, all because he didn't buy me an expensive enough gift for my birthday party. He didn't mention flipping the table. He didn't mention the $15,000 I had given him over the years. He painted himself as the ultimate underdog victim crushed by a greedy, capitalist villain. The video had almost 500,000 views. But it wasn't just a venting session. At the end of the video, a text overlay popped up. It was a link to a crowdfunding website. He was literally begging strangers on the internet to donate money to help an independent artist fight back against corporate family abuse so he could fund his album independently. "Look at the comments, Lauren," Destiny whispered, looking terrified for me. I scrolled down. It was a bloodbath. Thousands of strangers were calling me a monster, a sociopath, and a greedy corporate tyrant. But worse than the personal insults was the professional damage. Destiny showed me our company's public review pages. Overnight, an army of Cameron's new internet defenders had flooded our business profiles, leaving hundreds of fake one-star reviews. They were writing completely fabricated stories about how my logistics software was a scam, how I treated my employees like garbage, and how the company should be boycotted. My chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. He had weaponized the internet against my livelihood. I had 30 employees who relied on this company to pay their mortgages, and my unstable brother was trying to burn it to the ground for a few $1,000s in pity donations. I thanked Destiny, handed her the phone, and told her to coordinate with the legal team to start flagging the fake reviews for removal. Then I had to walk into the boardroom. I had to stand in front of 5 serious, wealthy investors and explain why our company's public rating had tanked overnight. I had to swallow my pride, expose my humiliating family dysfunction to the board, and assure them it was a targeted harassment campaign that was being handled. It was the most humiliating hour of my entire professional career. I survived the meeting, but the embarrassment burned hot in my veins. Cameron had crossed a line that I didn't even know existed. But the final, most devastating blow of the week didn't come from my brother. It came from my parents. By Friday afternoon, the intense wave of the internet mob had started to naturally recede, as it always does when people find a new drama to obsess over. I was exhausted. I felt hollowed out. Derek suggested I get out of the office for an hour, so I met my trusted friend and senior colleague, Bradley, for a late lunch at a quiet deli a few blocks from the corporate tower. Bradley is a sharp, no-nonsense guy who has known my family dynamics for years. He had been quietly monitoring the social media fallout to help our legal team issue takedown notices. We ordered our sandwiches, and for the first 20 minutes, we just talked about normal, boring work logistics. It was a desperately needed distraction. But as the waitress cleared our plates, Bradley's expression grew deeply serious. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the wooden table, looking around to ensure no one was listening. "Lauren, there is something I need to tell you," he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur. I debated keeping it to myself because I know how much stress you are under, but I think you need to know exactly what you are dealing with regarding your parents. I put my coffee cup down. What did they do? Bradley explained that his wife works as a loan officer at a regional bank here in Austin, the exact same bank my parents use. She isn't allowed to share confidential financial data, of course, but she is part of a local community social group with my mother. A few days ago, right around the time Cameron was screaming in my lobby, my mother had been crying at a community luncheon. She had openly complained to the other women about how financially strapped she and my father were right now. "Your mom told the group that she and your dad just had to take out a high-interest home equity loan on their house," Bradley said softly, watching my reaction closely. "They took out $6,000. And they used every single penny of it to completely pay off a massive, maxed-out credit card debt that Cameron had racked up buying designer clothes and vintage audio gear." I sat frozen in the deli booth. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to completely fade away into a dull ringing sound. "When did they pay it off?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Last week," Bradley replied. "Right before your birthday party. Right around the time your parents were calling you every single day, begging you to give him $5,000 because he was supposedly starving and couldn't pay his rent." The sheer, staggering magnitude of the betrayal hit me so hard I felt physically nauseous. I quickly did the horrifying math in my head. For an entire month, my father had lectured me on greed. My mother had sent me weeping text messages about how Cameron was depressed and skipping meals because he was so broke. They had aggressively guilt-tripped me, trying to extort $5,000 of my hard-earned savings to save his life. And the entire time they were doing that, they knew exactly where his money was going. They knew he wasn't starving. They knew he was buying luxury clothes and expensive toys. They had quietly taken out a loan against their own retirement home to cover his $6,000 of reckless, irresponsible debt, all while demanding that I pay for his daily survival. They didn't just enable him. They actively conspired with him. They treated me like a blind, stupid cash register. They were perfectly willing to drain my bank account so they could keep playing the role of the heroic, loving parents to their golden boy, without actually forcing him to take responsibility for his own actions. "I am so sorry, Lauren," Bradley said, seeing the absolute devastation on my face. I slowly shook my head. "Don't be sorry," I said, my voice suddenly very clear, very cold. "It is actually the exact piece of information I needed. I finally understand." I paid the bill. I walked back to my office. I didn't cry. The sadness was completely gone, burned away by a brilliant, blinding rage. I knew exactly what was going to happen this weekend. My parents were going to come to my house to demand that I fix the internet mess and give Cameron his money. And for the first time in my 32 years on this earth, I was absolutely, completely ready for them. I didn't have to wait long. At 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, I was sitting in my living room reading a book while Derek was fixing a shelf in the hallway. The doorbell rang sharply, 3 aggressive bursts in a row. I didn't even need to look out the window. I calmly placed my bookmark between the pages, stood up, and opened the heavy wooden front door. My father, Douglas, and my mother, Cynthia, were standing on my porch. They looked exhausted, deeply angry, and completely determined. They didn't wait for an invitation. My father pushed past me into the foyer, my mother trailing right behind him, clutching her purse tightly against her chest like a shield. "We need to talk," my father announced, his voice booming through my quiet house. "Right now." Derek immediately dropped his tools and walked into the living room, standing firmly right next to my shoulder. His jaw was tense, ready for a fight. I gently touched Derek's arm, silently telling him that I had this under control. I gestured for my parents to sit on the sofa. I chose to remain standing. "You have destroyed your brother," my mother started immediately, her voice breaking into a dramatic, practiced sob. "His crowdfunding page isn't making enough money. The label won't even return his calls. He is entirely broken, Lauren. You have to go on that internet app, make a video apologizing, and wire him the $12,000 right now. It is the only way to fix this family." "You are a vicious, cruel woman," my father added, pointing a finger at me. I did not raise a daughter to be a greedy corporate monster who steps on her own flesh and blood to feel powerful. I let them talk. I let them exhaust their rehearsed speeches of guilt and manipulation. I stood there and just stared at them, examining their faces as if they were completely strange to me. When they finally fell silent, waiting for me to break down and apologize, I took a slow, deep breath. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about the loan?" I asked. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's fake sobbing instantly stopped. My father's pointing hand slowly lowered. "What are you talking about?" my father stammered, his face straining of color. "The $6,000 home equity loan you took out last week," I said, my voice ringing out clear and perfectly steady. "The one you used to secretly pay off Cameron's luxury credit card debt. You paid for his vintage boots and his fancy audio gear, and then you spent 4 weeks calling me a monster, begging me to pay his rent because he was supposedly starving to death." My mother looked down at her shoes, her hands physically shaking. "Lauren, you don't understand. He was in so much trouble with the bank." "I understand perfectly," I cut her off, my voice rising just enough to command the room. "I understand that you view me as nothing more than a financial utility. You coddle a 29-year-old man who destroys my home, threatens my business, and launches a public smear campaign against my livelihood. You lie to my face to extort my savings so you can keep pretending he is a genius. You didn't come here today to fix this family. You came here because your golden child is finally facing the real world, and you want me to write a check to make it stop. He is your brother, my father yelled, desperately trying to regain control through sheer volume. He is a parasite, I snapped back, my words hitting like stones. And you two are his hosts. I have given him $15,000 over the last 3 years. I gave him a label deal. I gave him endless chances. And in return, he tried to burn my life to the ground. I stepped back, crossing my arms. I looked my parents dead in the eyes, delivering the final, unbreakable verdict. I am not making a video. I am not returning a single penny of my money. And I am never, ever bailing him out again. I am not a bank, and I am not your punching bag. You chose him over me a long time ago. Now, you get to live with him. I pointed directly at the front door. Get out of my house. Do not ever come back. My parents sat perfectly still for 5 agonizing seconds. They realized, finally, that the well was permanently dry. The invisible contract of the eldest daughter was shredded. My father stood up, his face red with a mixture of fury and deep shame. He grabbed my mother's arm. They walked out of my front door without saying another word. When the door clicked shut behind them, Derek wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a crushing, supportive hug. I didn't cry. I just took a massive, deep breath of clean air. A month passed. The chaos that had consumed my life completely evaporated, leaving behind a stark, quiet reality. I kept my distance, but through Bradley and a few remaining mutual acquaintances in the city, I occasionally heard updates on the spectacular collapse of Cameron's victim brand. The internet is a brutal, fickle machine. Cameron's viral TikTok fame lasted exactly 4 days before the algorithm completely abandoned him for a new controversy. His crowdfunding campaign, which he had desperately hoped would yield tens of thousands of dollars to launch his independent album, stalled out completely. In the end, he managed to raise exactly $800 from strangers, barely enough to cover a single month of groceries, let alone rent and studio time. Worse yet, the local music scene in Austin is a highly connected, fiercely gossip-driven community. The managing director of the record label hadn't just canceled Cameron's contract. Word had quickly spread around the local studios about exactly why the tech CEO's sister had suddenly pulled her financial backing. Label executives talk. Studio engineers talk. Within 2 weeks, Cameron was universally labeled as radioactive. No reputable producer in the city wanted to risk working with an artist known for throwing violent temper tantrums and launching public smear campaigns against his own investors. With his credit cards maxed out, his parents tapped out from their home equity loan, and my bank account permanently sealed off, reality finally came crashing down on him. Bradley told me over coffee that Cameron had recently been forced to give up his downtown loft. He had moved into a cramped, shared apartment on the far outskirts of the city. To pay his rent, the brilliant, visionary indie artist had finally been forced to take a job bussing sticky tables and washing dishes at a loud, greasy 24-hour diner off the highway. When I heard this, I waited for the rush of vindictive triumph. I waited to feel a sense of glowing, petty satisfaction that my revenge was complete. But the feeling never came. Sitting in my beautiful office, looking out over the city, I just felt a profound, echoing emptiness. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't care about him at all. He had finally become exactly what he was always meant to be without my money propping him up, nobody. The parasite had been detached, and my life was finally moving forward. Derek and I decided that we needed a hard, physical reset to completely wash the toxicity out of our lives. We spent a weekend sitting at the kitchen table, finalizing a plan to protect our newly found peace. We contacted our cell phone provider and officially changed both of our phone numbers, ensuring that neither my parents nor my brother could ever reach us in a moment of panic. I hired a permanent, strict corporate security firm for my logistics office building, just to be absolutely certain Cameron could never ambush me at work again. Then, we opened our laptops and booked a massive, ridiculously expensive 2-week vacation to a quiet, secluded resort in Hawaii. A week later, I was sitting on a white sand beach, listening to the gentle crash of the ocean waves. The sun was warm on my skin, and Derek was smiling beside me, reading a book. I looked out at the endless blue horizon and reflected on the strange, painful concept of family. I protected my life. I protected my marriage, and I successfully defended the business I bled to build. But the absolute truth is, in the process of protecting myself, I completely lost my entire biological family. I have heard through the grapevine that some distant aunts and uncles still talk about me at holiday gatherings. They say I went entirely too far. They whisper that a good sister should never financially ruin her own brother and abandon her elderly parents over a simple party foul, no matter how dramatic it was. They say blood is thicker than water and that I should have just been the bigger person. So, I have to ask you. I cut off his funding, ruined his career, and walked away forever. Am I the jerk? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and share your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next story.